I suppose his biggest concern was about misenchantment. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about what it was that perturbed William Blake so much at the time that he was living, and that he thought we were losing as we were moving into what we call modernity.
Yeah, and you've also reminded me that I didn't quite answer the sort of second part of your first question, which was, what's the 18th, 19th century got to do with us? And in a way, it's because then is when what's sometimes called disenchantment, or I prefer to think of as misenchantments, actually, because I think we live still in an enchanted world, but it's just become a bit squiffy. And that's bedding down in this era. I mean, if you just cite some of the figures that Blake was either contemporary with or near contemporary with, figures like, well, sort of a generation or two before him, figures like Newton and John Locke. Adam Smith is a near contemporary, but then figures like, I know, Jeremy Bentham, Mary Wollstonecraft, Tom Paine. These are figures that he, in some cases, knew. He illustrated Mary Wollstonecraft's work. He probably saved the life of Tom Paine by telling him to flee the country. And he certainly engages with utilitarianism, and Immanuel Kant, another direct contemporary. And so Blake, as a thinker, as much as an artist, is someone who speaks to me. And I think he is both, actually. So the Georgian period is the period when many of our ideas are shaping up. It's more deism than atheism in the Georgian period, but the two are deeply connected. And he sees, I think, the kind of undercurrent, the inner story of that coming about. So the way that, as Blake says, anything that now is was once first imagined. And so if you feel the dissatisfaction with this misenchantment, which I certainly do, then getting to grips with what's happening at root rather than just firefighting with symptoms is really vital. And so Blake takes us back to when that is starting to bed down. He's resisting it already then by seeing what's coming. And so it enables us to get back to what lies underneath so many of the assumptions of our times, and the way that we've become uncoupled from a wider vitality and have got sort of trapped in our own heads, and so see the world in fragmentary terms now. It brings great benefits. The reductive worldview enables you to get traction, particularly on the material aspects of existence, and that brings about many good things. That's also why I like Blake, because he doesn't want to sort of respond to fragmentation by just fragmenting even more, saying, no, you've got to be for this and against that. He, I think, sees that what matters is that the whole of human endeavor, which on the one hand is scientific, but on the other hand is imaginative, how that reaches out to its fullest kind of extent, rather than getting so narrowly focused on one aspect that it loses touch with that wider vision. So Newton is one of his favorite kind of bête noirs, perhaps a little unfairly on the actual Isaac Newton that we know now, because he had great esoteric interests himself. But nonetheless, he uses Newton to show how a very narrowing of the kind of imagination brings scientific illumination, but when it's narrow, at the cost of other things. And so bringing back that wider perspective is the way that Blake wants to engage with us. It's not about refusal. It's about sort of re-expansion. And I think the thing that he feels has gone wrong to be alert to is when the very power of the scientific imagination seduces us into believing that the abstractions of science, like Newton's second law of motion, F equals ma, an extraordinarily powerful, simple phrase, but feeling somehow that the laws of nature, as they're called now, are more real than our actual felt experience of being in the world. The laws of nature are useful if you want to fly to the moon, if you want to, build locomotion and so on. But to feel that power has become more real than the everyday engagement with our lives, that's what he wants to undermine and challenge. And similarly, I think that I mentioned Jeremy Bentham, utilitarianism, the idea that you decide because it brings about the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people, a kind of, well, philosophic calculus, as Bentham calls it, when that feels more real than the more messy business of trying to navigate your way through life, not by rules, but by felt responses. Blake wants to pull us back from the rules, which can be illuminating in a way. They can be guides, but they're not the real thing. The real thing is life as lived. So it's that I think he can help us with in a world that becomes very abstract, very general, partly because the power enables the technology that can build worlds which are abstract and general, utilitarian. I live in London. You just look at the modern buildings in London, very practical, but soulless. And how can we, say in that particular case, reimagine an architecture that is practical, but that is also soulful? It's that kind of question which Blake wants us to ask.